October 2nd, 2015. A Friday. The air in southwest Washington carried the crisp, invigorating scent of autumn, a promise of vibrant foliage and cooler days. For 29-year-old Kris Fowler, it was the dawn of another adventure, another mile marker on an ambitious journey that had become the defining quest of his young life. Kris wasn't just any hiker. He was a thru-hiker, a rare breed of individual who attempts to conquer the entire length of America's most demanding long-distance trails. This time, it was the Pacific Crest Trail, a monumental trek stretching 2,650 miles from the Mexican border to Canada, weaving through California, Oregon, and Washington's most formidable wildernesses. He had started his northbound journey, NOBO, as it's known in thru-hiker parlance. Back in May, 5 months of relentless physical exertion and profound mental solitude, pushing his body and spirit to their absolute limits. Most hikers aim to complete the PCT in 5 to 6 months, racing against the seasons, particularly the encroaching winter snows in the high Sierra Nevada and the Cascades. Kris was nearing the finish line, having navigated thousands of miles of arid desert, treacherous mountain passes, and dense forests. He was in the final leg, the challenging Washington section, a notoriously rugged landscape known for its steep ascents, deep valleys, and unpredictable weather. On this particular Friday, Kris was last seen by another hiker, a man known by his trail name, Hardcore. They met on the notorious Knife's Edge section of the trail, a narrow, exposed ridge that demands unwavering focus and a steady foot. It was late in the afternoon, the golden hour painting the treacherous landscape in long shadows. Hardcore observed Kris's pace, a determined stride born of months on the trail, and a familiar sight of his orange backpack, a beacon against the darkening green of the forest. They exchanged the customary thru-hiker greetings, a nod, a brief word about the trail ahead, the weather, the dwindling miles. Kris was heading north, pushing towards his next waypoint. Hardcore was going south, having completed his own section. This fleeting encounter, a mere blip in the vastness of the wilderness, would become the last confirmed sighting of Kris Fowler. The trail absorbed him, as it does so many, into its silent, indifferent embrace. The days that followed were filled with the usual anxieties of long-distance hiking. Kris's family knew he was in a remote area, often out of cell service for days at a time. It was part of the lifestyle, a deliberate disconnection from the constant hum of the digital world. But as October bled into November, and the promised calls and check-ins didn't materialize, a quiet dread began to seep in. The weather in the Cascades had taken a turn, as it always does in late autumn. Early snowfalls, treacherous ice, and plummeting temperatures were becoming the norm. The window for safe passage through the higher elevations was rapidly closing. His family, based in Ohio, became increasingly concerned. They knew Kris, knew his meticulous planning, his resilience. This uncharacteristic silence was a red flag. On October 20th, with no word for nearly 3 weeks, Kris's father, David Fowler, made the agonizing decision to report his son missing. He contacted the Klickitat County Sheriff's Office, the jurisdiction encompassing the last known location of Kris. The formal search began, albeit belatedly, a frantic race against time and the unforgiving elements. Law enforcement agencies, volunteer search and rescue teams, and even other thru-hikers who knew Kris from the trail mobilized. They scoured the PCT corridor, deploying helicopters for aerial reconnaissance, sending ground teams to retrace Kris's last known steps, and utilizing search dogs trained to pick up human scent in the dense wilderness. The search focused on a 40-mile section of the trail in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, a vast expanse of old-growth timber, rugged peaks, and deep canyons, all cloaked in the deceptive beauty of the Pacific Northwest. The initial stages of the search were exhaustive, but yielded no immediate clues. The forest seemed to swallow every trace of Kris. No discarded gear, no footprints, no telltale signs of a struggle or a fall. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. The weather grew colder, snow began to blanket the higher elevations, making the search increasingly perilous and eventually forcing search teams to scale back their efforts. The wilderness, with its immense scale and unforgiving terrain, often holds its secrets tightly. The hopes of finding Kris alive dwindled with each passing day, replaced by a growing sense of despair. The family, thousands of miles away, could only wait, their lives suspended in an agonizing limbo, haunted by the thought of Kris alone in the freezing wilderness. The trail, which had been a source of immense joy and accomplishment for Kris, had now become a terrifying mystery, a place where dreams could turn into nightmares in an instant. The question that echoed in every searcher's mind and every family member's heart was simple yet profound. What happened to Kris Fowler? And why the mountains kept their silence? The silence of the mountains was a heavy shroud, pressing down on the hopes of Kris Fowler's family and the dedicated search and rescue teams. Weeks turned into months, and the initial, intensive ground and aerial searches in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest had come up empty. The changing seasons, a beautiful spectacle for most, became a cruel torment for those desperately seeking answers. Winter's grip tightened, blanketing the high country in feet of snow, making any further search efforts impossible. The trail, once a path of adventure, was now a frozen, impassable fortress, holding its secrets even more tightly. As spring hesitantly arrived in 2016, thawing the ground and melting the snowpacks, the search for Kris resumed with renewed, albeit diminished, vigor. Klickitat County Sheriff's deputies, volunteers, and private investigators continued to comb the vast wilderness. They utilized updated technologies, including drones, and focused on areas that had been inaccessible during the winter months. The family, still reeling from the shock and uncertainty, never gave up hope. Kris's father, David Fowler, became a tireless advocate, posting flyers, reaching out to media outlets, and engaging with the tight-knit thru-hiking community, hoping that someone, somewhere, might have seen something, remembered something that could shed light on Kris's disappearance. The thru-hiking community, in a remarkable display of solidarity, shared information, discussed theories, and even organized their own informal searches, driven by the unspoken code that no hiker is left behind. Despite these concerted efforts, the wilderness continued to offer no concrete clues. The sheer scale of the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, an area larger than Rhode Island, made the task monumental. The trail itself, while marked, often winds through dense undergrowth, over rocky terrain, and alongside precipitous drops. A misstep, a fall, an injury in such a remote location could be fatal, and the body easily hidden by the unforgiving landscape. Theories abounded. A fall, an encounter with wildlife, hypothermia, or perhaps even something more sinister. But without any physical evidence, they remained just theories, fueling the anguish and leaving an open wound for the family. Then, on November 7th, 2016, over a year after Kris vanished, a small, yet profoundly significant discovery was made. A hunter, traversing an area significantly off the main Pacific Crest Trail, stumbled upon a tattered orange backpack. The color was unmistakable, a striking match for the one Kris Fowler was known to carry. The location was approximately 3 miles west of the PCT, in a rugged, heavily wooded area known as Big Lava Bed, part of the same vast forest where Kris had disappeared. This was a critical deviation from the established trail, raising immediate questions. Why was Kris so far off course? Had he been disoriented, injured, or was there another, more troubling explanation? Law enforcement and search teams were immediately dispatched to the site. The backpack, though weathered by a year of exposure to the elements, contained several personal items that were unequivocally identified as belonging to Kris Fowler. Among them were his driver's license, credit cards, a small amount of cash, and some clothing. Crucially, his cell phone was also found, but it was damaged and provided no immediate answers. The discovery of the backpack, while providing the first tangible link to Kris, simultaneously deepened the mystery. The items within it, particularly the wallet and cash, seemed to rule out robbery as a motive. The fact that the backpack was found 3 miles off trail was the most perplexing detail. Thru-hikers, especially those nearing the end of their journey, are meticulously focused on staying on the marked path. Deviating so significantly, particularly in such rugged terrain, was highly unusual. The Klickitat County Sheriff's Office, with the assistance of the FBI, initiated a new, intensified search of the surrounding area. 9 units were deployed, specializing in human remains detection. Every inch of the dense forest around the backpack's discovery site was painstakingly examined. The terrain was challenging, characterized by ancient lava flows, thick undergrowth, and steep ravines, making the search slow and arduous. The hope was that the backpack's location would lead them to Kris himself, or at least to more definitive clues about his fate. The discovery finally provided a focal point, a tangible piece of the puzzle that had been missing for so long. But with every step forward, new questions arose, echoing the vast, silent wilderness itself. What forced Kris off the trail, and what ultimate fate awaited him in this desolate, unforgiving landscape? The answers remained elusive, hidden in the shadows of the ancient forest just beyond reach. The discovery of Kris Fowler's orange backpack in the Big Lava Bed was a seismic event in the ongoing mystery, shattering the agonizing silence that had surrounded his disappearance for over a year. It provided a tangible connection, a beacon in the wilderness, yet it also introduced a new, more profound layer of perplexity. Why was his backpack, with essential items like his wallet and cash still inside, found 3 miles off the well-marked Pacific Crest Trail? Thru-hikers are experts at navigation, and straying so far from the path, especially for an experienced individual like Kris nearing the completion of his journey, was highly uncharacteristic. The location itself, a rugged, heavily wooded expanse characterized by ancient lava flows and dense undergrowth, was not an easy place to traverse, even for an experienced hiker. With the backpack's discovery, the investigative narrative shifted dramatically. The initial theories of a simple fall on the trail or an unobserved medical emergency became less plausible. The fact that he was so far off trail suggested a deliberate deviation, or perhaps a desperate attempt to find help or escape something. The Klickitat County Sheriff's Office, working closely with the FBI, launched a massive, coordinated search operation focused on the area around the backpack. 9 units trained in human remains detection were brought in, their keen senses honed to pick up the faintest scent. Ground teams, often comprised of volunteers who knew the trail intimately, meticulously combed the challenging terrain, moving slowly through the thick brush and over jagged lava rocks. Helicopters conducted aerial surveys, their powerful cameras attempting to pierce through the dense canopy that had so effectively hidden Kris for so long. The search of the Big Lava Bed region was intense, but agonizingly fruitless in the immediate aftermath. The vastness of the forest, combined with the difficult topography, conspired to keep its secrets. Every rock, every fallen log, every hidden crevice was a potential hiding place, a silent witness to a tragedy. The family, particularly David Fowler, remained a constant presence, communicating with investigators, providing insights into Kris's habits and personality, and holding onto a fragile thread of hope that some definitive answer, however grim, would finally emerge. The emotional toll was immense, a perpetual state of grief and uncertainty that no family should have to endure. Then, nearly a year after the backpack's discovery, on July 10, 2017, another crucial piece of evidence emerged, further deepening the mystery and shifting the focus of the investigation. A volunteer searcher, working independently but with a deep commitment to finding Kris, discovered what appeared to be the frame of a tent. It was found a considerable distance from the backpack, approximately 2 miles further west into the dense wilderness of the Big Lava Bed, even further off the main PCT. This discovery was profoundly puzzling. Why would Kris have 2 separate campsites, miles apart? Or why would pieces of his gear be so scattered? The tent frame, like the backpack, showed signs of prolonged exposure to the elements, but its presence suggested a potential bivouac site, a place where Kris might have attempted to set up shelter. The location of the tent frame, even more remote and difficult to access than the backpack site, immediately raised suspicions. This was not a typical place for a thru-hiker to camp. It was deep in the wilderness, away from water sources and established trails. It suggested a situation where Kris might have been disoriented, injured, or perhaps actively trying to avoid detection. The Klickitat County Sheriff's Office and the FBI immediately secured the site and launched another exhaustive search. This time, the focus was not just on finding Kris, but on piecing together a timeline and understanding the sequence of events that led to his gear being so widely dispersed. The two distinct discovery sites, miles apart, created a disturbing narrative void. It defied conventional understanding of a hiker lost in the wilderness. If Kris had simply gotten lost, why would his backpack be found in one spot and a tent frame in another, even further off trail? And why, in either location, was there no sign of Kris himself? The scattered nature of the evidence suggested something more complex than a simple accident. Was he moving frantically, leaving items behind in a state of distress? Was someone else involved, manipulating the scene, or moving Kris's belongings? These unsettling questions began to overshadow the initial hopes that the backpack would lead directly to Kris. Instead, each new piece of evidence seemed to push him further into the enigmatic depths of the wilderness, transforming the search for a lost hiker into something far more intricate and potentially sinister. The big lava bed, with its ancient, silent landscape, seemed to be guarding a terrible secret, slowly revealing its fragmented clues, each one pointing to a narrative more troubling than the last. The narrative of Kris Fowler's disappearance, already steeped in agonizing mystery, took a dark and unsettling turn with the discovery of the tent frame. The scattered nature of his belongings, a backpack 3 miles off the PCT, and now a tent frame 2 miles further west, deep within the big lava bed, painted a perplexing picture that defied easy explanation. This wasn't the typical pattern of a lost hiker who might have succumbed to the elements near their last known position. This was something far more disjointed, suggesting a sequence of events that pointed to either extreme disorientation, a desperate struggle, or even external intervention. The Klickitat County Sheriff's Office and the FBI meticulously processed the tent frame site, looking for any additional clues. The hope was that the tent might reveal a makeshift camp, offering insights into Kris's final days or hours. However, the tent frame itself yielded little definitive information. It was clear that it had been exposed to the elements for a long time, mirroring the condition of the backpack. The absence of any other significant personal items, or more importantly, any sign of Kris himself, amplified the frustration and the creeping sense of unease. The investigators were now confronted with a deeply troubling scenario. If Kris had simply gotten lost, why would his backpack, containing crucial identification and supplies, be left behind while he continued deeper into the wilderness? And why would he set up a tent frame even further off trail, only to abandon it? The logical progression of a lost hiker typically involves clinging to their pack, which contains essential survival gear, or attempting to find a more accessible location. The scattered gear suggested a frantic or forced movement, a narrative that began to lean away from simple accident and toward something more complex, perhaps even criminal. As the years passed, the official search efforts, while never entirely abandoned, naturally diminished in intensity. Resources were finite, and without new, compelling evidence, the vast wilderness became an overwhelming obstacle. However, Kris's father, David Fowler, refused to let the case fade into obscurity. He became an unwavering force, tirelessly working to keep his son's story alive. He maintained constant communication with law enforcement, pressed for new investigations, and, perhaps most powerfully, continued to engage with the thru-hiking community. He understood that these individuals, with their intimate knowledge of the PCT and its surrounding wilderness, were often the best hope for discovering new clues. And it was from this dedicated community, through a shared sense of purpose and compassion, that another, truly astonishing discovery would eventually emerge years later that would once again tear open the wound of Kris's disappearance and offer a grim, but potentially definitive, answer. This remarkable breakthrough would come not from a planned search operation, but from a chance encounter, a moment of serendipity in the vastness of the wilderness, proving that sometimes the mountains do not keep their secrets forever. In the summer of 2021, nearly 6 years after Kris Fowler vanished, the Pacific Crest Trail was once again bustling with the seasonal pilgrimage of thru-hikers. Among them was a group of volunteers, not officially sanctioned search and rescue, but individuals driven by the communal spirit of the trail and a desire to help find one of their own. They were specifically looking for Kris Fowler, guided by the persistent efforts of David Fowler and the shared hope of the community. These volunteers weren't just hikers. They were experienced outdoors enthusiasts, often with their own knowledge of survival and navigation. On June 29, 2021, this volunteer group made a discovery that would profoundly alter the course of the investigation and finally provide the agonizing answers Kris's family had so desperately sought. They were searching an extremely remote and challenging area known as Cultus Lake, located approximately 7 miles west of the Pacific Crest Trail and a significant distance from where Kris's backpack and tent frame had been found years earlier. Cultus Lake is not easily accessible. It's a high-elevation, glacial lake surrounded by rugged terrain and dense, old-growth forest, a truly isolated and unforgiving place. As they meticulously scoured the shoreline, one of the volunteers spotted a brightly colored object partially submerged in the icy waters of the lake. It was a distinctive orange and black sleeping bag, the type commonly used by backpackers for extreme cold weather. The color immediately caught their attention, a chilling echo of Kris's orange backpack. Upon closer inspection, the sleeping bag was pulled from the water, sodden and weathered, but undeniably a piece of high-quality hiking gear. And then, the ultimate, heartbreaking discovery. Inside the sleeping bag, tragically preserved by the cold, glacial waters of Cultus Lake, were human remains. The volunteer group immediately notified the Klickitat County Sheriff's Office. Deputies, along with forensic investigators and representatives from the FBI, were swiftly dispatched to the remote location, a challenging journey even for experienced personnel. The scene was carefully secured, and the painstaking process of recovering the remains and the sleeping bag began. Due to the remote and difficult terrain, the recovery operation took several days, requiring specialized equipment and careful planning. The remains were transported to the medical examiner's office for forensic analysis and identification. The subsequent forensic examination confirmed the agonizing truth. The human remains found within the sleeping bag were positively identified as those of Kris Fowler. Dental records provided the conclusive match, bringing a definitive, yet heartbreaking, end to the 6-year-long search. The news was delivered to David Fowler, finally ending his long vigil in the most tragic way possible. The discovery of Kris's body, inside his sleeping bag, in such an incredibly remote and inaccessible location, raised a cascade of new, unsettling questions. Why was Kris 7 miles off the Pacific Crest Trail and even further from his previously discovered backpack and tent frame? How did he end up in Cultus Lake, a place that requires a deliberate, arduous journey to reach? And critically, what forced him into his sleeping bag, in the water, in such a secluded spot? The circumstances were highly unusual and defied the conventional explanations for a lost hiker. Thru-hikers rarely carry their sleeping bags separate from their packs, and the idea of Kris entering the icy lake voluntarily in his sleeping bag seemed illogical. The location and manner of his death pointed to something far more complex and potentially sinister than a simple accident or exposure. The serene, glacial waters of Cultus Lake, once a pristine wilderness haven, now held the final, chilling secret of Kris Fowler's last moments, marking the tragic culmination of a 6-year mystery that would now transition from a missing person case to a full-blown death investigation. The truth, it seemed, was only now beginning to emerge from the depths. The confirmation that the remains found in Cultus Lake were those of Kris Fowler brought a painful form of closure to his family, but simultaneously ignited a new, more urgent phase of the investigation. The initial missing person case transformed into a death investigation, spearheaded by the Klickitat County Sheriff's Office and the FBI. The focus shifted from "where is Kris" to "what happened to Kris" and "why was he found in such an unusual manner and location." The circumstances of his discovery, 7 miles off the PCT, miles from his backpack and tent frame, inside his sleeping bag in a glacial lake, immediately raised red flags, pointing away from a simple, accidental death by exposure or fall. The immediate priority for investigators was the forensic examination of Kris's remains and the sleeping bag itself. Pathologists and forensic anthropologists meticulously examined every detail, searching for signs of trauma, foul play, or any clues that could shed light on his final moments. The cold water of Cultus Lake, while preserving the remains, also made the forensic process complex. Determining a precise cause of death after 6 years of exposure to the elements in a submerged environment is incredibly challenging. However, any indication of injury, particularly non-accidental trauma, would be crucial. The location of Cultus Lake itself became a central point of inquiry. Why would Kris, an experienced thru-hiker, deviate so drastically from the PCT, not just to the big lava bed where his pack and tent were found, but even further to this remote, high-altitude lake? Accessing Cultus Lake requires significant effort and navigational skill. It's not a place one simply stumbles upon by accident while lost on the main trail. It suggested either a deliberate, if desperate, choice on Kris's part, or an external force compelling him to that location. Investigators began to reconstruct Kris's movements in the days leading up to his disappearance, revisiting the last confirmed sighting by Hardcore on the Knife's Edge. They re-interviewed other hikers who were on the trail around that time, scouring old trail registers and social media posts from the thru-hiker community for any overlooked details. The scattered nature of his belongings, the backpack, the tent frame, and finally his body in the sleeping bag, demanded a narrative that could logically connect these disparate points. One prominent theory that emerged was that Kris might have been disoriented or injured, perhaps suffering from hypothermia or a medical emergency, and had attempted to seek shelter or warmth in a sleeping bag, even in the lake. Hypothermia can cause irrational behavior, and people have been known to shed clothing or seek water in extreme stages. However, the sheer distance from the trail and the other gear still made this difficult to reconcile. Why would he leave his pack, the source of food and additional warm clothing, to go into the lake with just a sleeping bag? Another, more disturbing theory began to gain traction: foul play. The idea that Kris was the victim of a crime, perhaps robbed, though his wallet was found with cash, or targeted for another reason, became a distinct possibility. The scattering of his gear could be an attempt to obscure the scene or move his body. The remote location of Cultus Lake, while making it difficult to find him, would also be an ideal place to commit a crime and dispose of a body, ensuring it remained hidden for years. The thru-hiking community, while generally safe, is not immune to isolated incidents of crime, and the thought that a fellow hiker might have fallen victim to violence in the wilderness was a chilling prospect. The Klickitat County Sheriff's Office issued an official statement indicating that the investigation was ongoing and that no stone would be left unturned. They appealed to the public, particularly anyone who might have been in the vicinity of the PCT or Cultus Lake in October 2015, to come forward with any information, no matter how insignificant it might seem. The quiet, majestic wilderness that had held Kris Fowler's secret for so long had finally given him back, but the questions surrounding his tragic end now screamed louder than ever. The peaceful image of a hiker embracing nature had been irrevocably shattered, replaced by the grim reality of a cold case, waiting for justice in the silent, unforgiving mountains. The final chapter of Kris Fowler's story was yet to be written, and the truth, hidden for so long, remained stubbornly elusive, submerged like his body, awaiting a final revelation. The revelation of Kris Fowler's body in Cultus Lake, 6 years after his disappearance, marked a devastating turning point, transitioning the prolonged agony of a missing person case into the stark reality of a death investigation. The sheer remoteness of the discovery, 7 miles off the main Pacific Crest Trail, deep within a high-altitude glacial lake, raised a chilling array of questions that pointed to something far more complex and troubling than a simple hiking accident. The fact that he was found inside his sleeping bag in the water, miles from his previously discovered backpack and tent frame, fundamentally reshaped the narrative. The Klickitat County Sheriff's Office, in conjunction with the FBI and other forensic experts, embarked on the arduous task of unraveling the circumstances surrounding Kris's death. The primary objective was the forensic examination of the remains. Despite the passage of 6 years and the aquatic environment, forensic pathologists meticulously searched for any signs of trauma, evidence of injury, or clues regarding the cause and manner of death. The cold water offered a degree of preservation, but also posed significant challenges for a definitive analysis. They sought to determine if there were any pre-mortem injuries or signs of struggle that would indicate foul play. The state of decomposition, even in cold water, often obscures such details, yet every bone, every shred of material, was scrutinized for answers. The scattered nature of Kris's gear became a central puzzle piece. His backpack, found 3 miles off the PCT, contained identification and cash, seemingly ruling out robbery as an initial motive for his deviation. His tent frame, discovered 2 miles further west, suggested a desperate attempt at shelter or a forced bivouac. And now his body in a sleeping bag, 7 miles off the main trail, deep within Cultus Lake. This dispersion of vital equipment suggested a frantic, perhaps forced, movement through the wilderness or a staged scene. It was highly uncharacteristic for an experienced thru-hiker to abandon essential gear in such a manner. Investigators began to explore multiple scenarios. One theory considered was the possibility of severe medical emergency or extreme disorientation leading to irrational behavior. Hypothermia, in its advanced stages, can cause confusion, paradoxical undressing, and an irrational desire to seek water. Could Kris have, in a state of extreme distress, wandered miles off trail, shed his backpack, attempted to set up a tent, and then, in a final confused act, entered the lake in a sleeping bag? While a possibility, the sheer distances involved and the presence of his wallet with cash still in his abandoned pack made this a difficult narrative to fully embrace without additional evidence. However, the most disturbing theory, one that gained increasing traction, was that of foul play. The remote and rugged terrain around Cultus Lake, while challenging for searchers, also presented an ideal location for a perpetrator to dispose of a body and obscure evidence. The scattering of Kris's gear could be interpreted as an attempt to mislead investigators or to remove items that might link a suspect to the scene. Had Kris encountered someone hostile on the trail? Was he led astray or forced into the wilderness? The thru-hiking community, while generally tight-knit and supportive, is not immune to the rare, horrific instances of violence. The idea that Kris might have been targeted, murdered, and then submerged in the lake was a chilling prospect that weighed heavily on investigators. The Klickitat County Sheriff's Office maintained transparency throughout the ongoing investigation, appealing to the public for any information that could help clarify Kris's final movements. They particularly sought individuals who might have been hiking or camping in the vicinity of the PCT or Cultus Lake in the fall of 2015. Every fragment of information, every memory, no matter how seemingly insignificant, held the potential to unlock the truth. The profound silence of the wilderness that had guarded Kris's secret for so long had finally been broken, but the full story of his tragic end remained submerged, much like his body, awaiting the critical pieces of evidence that would bring it to the surface. The enduring mystery of Kris Fowler serves as a stark reminder of the unpredictable dangers that can lurk even in the most serene and beautiful corners of the wild, and the relentless pursuit of truth by those who refuse to let the silence claim another lost soul. The question was no longer where Kris was, but what unimaginable events unfolded in those desolate mountains, leading to his final, tragic resting place in the depths of Cultus Lake.